Howdy, I'm Jammer. Well, we're at it again. So, what are we going to be talking about today? Well, unfortunately, it's not going to be the next Green Lantern book. Sorry, I haven't even started it yet, but hopefully soon, around the time this airs, a particular event related to Green Lanterns will have been announced. If not, I'll probably do it when I do the next video, or I'll make some sort of announcement in the description section below. Whatever the case, today, as this lovely little book right here is demonstrating, we're going to be returning to an author that we discussed in a previous video before, which is Steve MacIsaac, except this time we're going to be talking about his full-length graphic novel, Unpacking. Now, this book is an imprint of Northwest Press. They're, as far as I'm aware of, a sort of queer-focused publisher, and they're one of a really small group of indie publishers that are trying to put out a whole host of comics away from the big major players like DC, Dark Horse, Image, and that fourth one begins with a Z or an upside-down W or something like that. Anyway, Unpacking follows a lot of the tropes that Steve MacIsaac has followed through most of his creative career. Now, before I get into that, who is Steve MacIsaac? Steve MacIsaac is, as his About page in the very back, is an ex-Canadian. He's considered an expatriate because he's living in San Francisco. Not entirely sure really that qualifies as expatriatism, but whatever the case, he's a Canadian, he lives here in the United States, and he makes comics, predominantly from the focus of the lives of cisgender gay men, usually in what's known as the bear community. Now again, he kind of follows and flows through a wide variety of what it's like to be a gay man, period. He's not focusing on one subgroup within the gay community, but if you ever take the time to read his books and his work, most of the men in the collection are going to be, well, not me. Let's put it that way. Steve MacIsaac's work focuses on the domestic aspects of being a gay man. It focuses on life, careers, relationship, lots of sexuality, and as I noted before in a previous video, he has, written several small independent works about the lives of gay men, as well as the collection Sticky, which is a predominantly pornographic work. What's unique about Unpacking is it really feels like Steve MacIsaac sort of coming full center and basically doing what he's been doing with his Shirtlifter series, which I believe is up to number 6 at this point, and then sort of just combining it in one central storyline that, as you can see, I believe it comes out to about 234 pages. So that's a pretty significant departure from the previous work where he'd be making all of like 32-page comics. This is a big book based upon what has come before, and I can assure you, if you're a fan of Steve Isaac, you're going to love this book. I'm really excited about it because I love Steve Isaac. He's like one of my favorite comics makers, but I also, I gotta show off a little bit because I bought this off of his Etsy page, which I'll absolutely post a link to in the description section below, and I bought it thinking, okay, it's probably going to be like a third-party person shipping the book off. It was actually Steve Isaac himself handling the transaction. So when I pulled up my Etsy page, or when I pulled up Etsy a couple days later, the little bell notification thing had a big red dot on it, and I was like, that's weird, I've never seen that before. I'll open it up, and Steve MacIsaac was asking me, hey, do you want me to autograph it? To which case the nerd in me went, yes, please! And so I responded back, yes, and I was like, oh, okay, it's like in like 2 or 3 days, he's probably mailed it off already. Come back the next day, he said, no, I haven't mailed it yet, so if you want something specific, just tell me what you want. So I said, can you make it out to Jammer, please? And I imagine his deep, burly voice, he said, hell yeah. To which case I go, oh my. And then sure enough, several days later, after I had finished swooning, I received this beautiful book, opened it up, and saw this just gorgeous spread. Steve, if you're watching this, thank you so much. I love this book so much, and I think you're so awesome. And if you're not Steve watching this, check Steve out because his work is great. And now, before I go full-on nerd, let's get to what is Unpacking actually about? Okay, so I have fanboyed out enough. It's probably time to actually talk about the comic book and what it's about. Unpacking is a graphic novel predominantly told in about 4 or 5 parts, which is a story about the protagonist, Matt. Now, he is a gay man living in Canada. He predominantly has a job that predominantly handles graphic design, and the big aspect of the story is he has recently gotten out of an 8-year relationship with his ex-boyfriend, Michael. It's not determined or at least as far as I can recall, it doesn't suggest anything that they were ever close to getting married, because again, gay marriage is unitedly across the board within the nation of Canada. It's supposed to be here in the United States as well, but, well, that's its own thing. Anyway, Matt has recently broken up with his boyfriend, Michael, or really what has happened is Michael has left him for a man who's 7 years younger than him, and so Matt is feeling a lot of depression. He's recently moved into a new apartment, and if I can find the page, what's really important, or really telling about this move, is continually he has not unpacked at all. His apartment is regularly shown to be nothing but an empty bookshelf filled with boxes, hence the title, Unpacking. I see what you did there. The story follows Matt basically as he's moving or hopping from one night stand to one night stand to one night stand, basically sort of filling up the emotional void in himself through sex. Now again, you'll note up here in the corner, the book specifically says for adults only. And again, I would remind you, we're talking about Steve MacIsaac. He is one of the contributors to Sticky and Shirtlifter, and tons of other books which are about gay men and the sex they have. So, forewarning, there's probably going to be a but. I said the B word on camera. I'm so sorry if you are offended. But, if you have a problem with butts, I said it twice, forewarning, you might see one. There's also honest and very graphic depictions of gay male sexuality, which will involve oral sex, anal sex. Because I'm not going to make this an age-restricted video, I won't be showing those images, but be forewarned, if you're of, a light constitution, you may want to rethink picking up this book and instead find yourself a lovely copy of Peanuts. Anyway, moving on. As I just noted before, Matt is moving from one night stand to one night stand. He's occasionally interacting with his 2 friends, Chris and Chris, 2 men who are both married, and eventually one of the one night stands he meets is an Australian man by the name of Connor, who, Matt discovers, is married to a woman and has 2 children. The book basically follows Matt and Connor's relationship, which messy is kind of the wrong word for it. It's just really, really difficult because Connor is extraordinarily closeted. He's extraordinarily homophobic. He has a lot of internalized homophobia. He has a lot of externalized homophobia. And the book is often Matt challenging Connor on his homophobia, basically challenging him, one, to stop using the F word to describe gay people, but then also to challenge other things about the ideas that it's possible for 2 men to be in love. It's possible for 2 men to be married and very happily in love. It's very possible to have a real emotional connection with another man that isn't just a phase or just lust. The relationship goes basically in the sort of very bumpy rhythm until eventually one night during sex, Connor tells Matt, "I love you," and then severs all contact with him. The book then follows Matt as he tries to just sort of reconcile or basically bounce back from this complete abandonment by Connor, his emotional devastation, and then the reappearance of his ex-boyfriend, Michael. The book ultimately ends with Matt discovering a sort of reaffirmed sense of self and figuring out who he is, what he wants out of life, relationship, sex, what have you. So fundamentally, this book is very much a domestic drama. It's very much about personal exploration. It's about personal growth. And it's about, far more than anything else, the difficulty of maintaining one's vulnerability and desire for a real healthy relationship. There's not a lot of physical action in this book other than the sex. So again, if you're not interested in books which explore sexuality, Unpacking probably isn't for you. But if you want a book which really digs into relationships, how they can grow, how they can shrink, suddenly disappear, how they can plummet, and how that can affect us personally and the way we react to it, Unpacking is a really interesting book. And I bought this book not knowing actually what it was about. It was really hard to find any real descriptions of the plot online because most of the time it's just Steve MacIsaac, the predominantly gay author, has come up with a full-fledged graphic novel. The story kind of resonated with me personally because, again, as I've noted before, I'm recently getting divorced, and it just so happens that I was with my ex for 5 years and then engaged to them for 3. So coming out of an 8-year relationship and then beginning a book about a messy breakup that had been 8 years, I don't want to say it was triggering, but it was, oddly enough, exactly what I needed. And so another thing that I would definitely encourage for you about this book is that if you have been in a recent breakup, or if you've ever had a messy breakup, or if you've ever basically just been heartbroken, Unpacking has a lot to offer the reader. The story is really interesting, even though it may not be sort of elaborate or complex or action-packed. There's a lot of real depth in this book because of the continual interactions between the characters and the way Steve MacIsaac shows people who are trying to find themselves, trying to recognize what their faults are, how to overcome those faults, and basically just how to be in the absence of relationships and how to approach new ones. I can't say enough about just the content of this book. Steve MacIsaac is a brilliant, brilliant writer and comics creator, a brilliant cartoonist because of the way he brings this real beautiful humanity to every book that he touches. So with the content of the book established, let's talk a little bit now about why I think Steve MacIsaac is really great for the medium of comics and the amazing things that he does therein. Anyway, where was I? Oh yes, trying to get feeling in my fingers again. It's hard to hold a big book like this just over and over again while also making sure that you can read the title. So I'll return to this format. So I addressed already what Unpacking is about. It's ultimately about a gay man who's suffered a messy breakup, is trying to find himself again, trying to find his energy and his flow of life again. Now, as you'll note, as I pointed out before in Shirt Lifter number 1, one of the interesting things about Steve MacIsaac is that in terms of his panel layouts, he has a lot of tricks up his sleeve, but he's also a very conservative cartoonist, and the fact that he doesn't do very many 2-page spreads, 1-page spreads. He does a lot of usual small layouts of panels because a lot of his strength is in his dialogue. Just looking at this passage here where Matt is talking to his friend Chris about his breakup while he's making couscous, we see there's really a lot of not necessarily moment-to-moment passages, but definitely action-to-action. We're watching these characters move through space, but not a lot. There's not a lot of grand sweeping gestures or very bold, iconic moments in the book, but at the same time, it works for what he's trying to do. The only time the reader gets a real sense of space is a lot of times near the opening of a chapter, or really a lot of the moments around a book. So usually the reader will get a kind of Shining-esque book 1, and there will usually be a small image which will then precede some sort of landscape shot or a shot of a major downtown city. That's about the biggest Steve MacIsaac will really do in terms of space. He's really more oriented towards small interactions between the characters. If Alexander and I are in a Steve MacIsaac book, it's predominantly going to remain within the confines of the American flag behind me. That's going to be it, which may at first not seem terribly interesting to some readers, but hopefully it will get you to understand that his focus is really on the human, the small interactions which can take place. Now, Again, he is also, as I noted before, a man who explores just about every facet of gay male identity. And if you don't know anything about gay men, or queer men, or bisexual men, or pansexual men, we kind of like to do the sex sometimes. Actually, a lot of times. Actually, a lot. So yeah, this book has a lot of sex in it. Case in point, I picked this sequence here because this actually precedes the more graphic elements of this particular sex scene. But I also picked it out here because what's one of the interesting things about MacIsaac is while a lot of the dialogue sequences tend to be very sort of packed, almost grid-like structures, whenever he gets into the more sexual components of the book, you see him willing to play with panel layouts a little bit more. He plays with a continual black background, so the reader is never left in sort of this white empty space with panels sort of plastered onto that. Instead, the pages are almost always black with these panels arranged on top of that. And again, what's also really important to recognize is you can kind of get an idea of the range of body types that MacIsaac typically represents. Occasionally he will draw, again, sort of more skinny men. Sometimes he will draw a twink. If you don't know what a twink is, Google it. But for the most part, a lot of the men in his books tend to be otters and bears. And if you don't know what an otter and a bear is, Google it. Okay, fine. A bear tends to be a pretty big, bulky gay man. Otters tend to be a little bit more slimmer, sometimes a little bit more fitter, and they're prone to have body hair. Twinks tend to be really tall or really skinny men that don't have a lot of body hair and sometimes come across as slightly boyish. I was called a twink one time by a friend, and I'm like, really? Like, really? Anyway, what's important here about this passage is not just, ooh, look, they're doing the sex. I mean, they are, and it's kind of hot. But what's really interesting is the way he arranges these panels to really present the sex in the book. There's a lot of dynamic effect to them. And I sometimes feel that I overuse the phrase dynamic, but in those passages, it most definitely is. Now, another sort of trick that MacIsaac uses is one that plenty of cartoonists have used before in the past, which is holding the eye in one place and sort of just moving the characters around. So in one particular scene, Matt and Connor are at the movie theater, and Matt decides to pick a seat. Connor sits down 2 spaces away, and he says, "Why are you sitting over there? I don't sit in the gay seat." The what? When you go to a movie with a friend, don't you leave a seat between you? It's never even occurred to me, but people will assume you're gay. I am gay. So, do you need to broadcast it? What are you doing? Well, we don't want to give people the wrong idea. That sequence is shot over 1 page, and just looking at it, I would encourage you, just pause the screen for a moment and really look at it. You don't need to read all the contents of the word balloons, because I just read everything out to you, but look at Matt, look at Connor, and observe the way the reader is kept in one spot. Again, whereas opposed to the previous page where we kind of follow these 2 characters around a space, here instead, you see MacIsaac holding the shot over and over and over again using just the same repetitive rectangular panel design. This is a good effect, and one that works really well on the subsequent page when Connor realizes that Matt is offended and annoyed and frustrated, and we get this beautiful sequence where Connor eventually walks down and sits right next to Matt. Again, by basically using the same shot over and over and over and over again, he's able to sort of present the tension of the moment. He's able to show the movement of the characters in this time and space, and he's able to show, again, the potential comics artist that you don't have to have endless panels of people doing amazing things. Sometimes it's important just to keep the page still and watch the characters interact, because sometimes that will yield a much more powerful reaction. Now, I noted before that Steve MacIsaac tends to draw very muscular men. If you just Google search Steve MacIsaac, dude is, I believe the expression is swole. Yeah, I shouldn't try to be cool. The dude is thick. He's got biceps twice as big as my head, and his pecs alone look like they could crush watermelons. That's only so much of an understatement. He's a pretty well-built guy. Now, part of that is also in his aesthetic as well, because again, you'll note that the character Matt is a pretty again, swole dude. And so what's interesting about MacIsaac's work is he tends to draw a lot of attention to the body. His work isn't necessarily iconic, I would say, because there's still a lot of detail going into each of them to prevent the reader from printing too much on them. But you can observe just from those images and those sequences alone, he's not doing a super photorealistic representation of the body. He's still keeping a somewhat cartoony aspect of them. And I think that works to a great effect. One begins to feel as if these characters are real, independent people, but one doesn't feel like he's trying to create just a photorealistic book. He's trying to just use comics and make comics, but still keep the work somewhat realistic so readers can appreciate it. Now again, in terms of layouts, this two-page spread is really interesting because Matt and Connor are having, yet again, a conversation about homosexuality, male-male same-sexual intimacy, the difference between being straight, being gay, the important about being honest. And this particular sequence is pretty tense. And so what's really unique about this two-page sequence is the way he employs this grid panel, using one page to focus on Matt, and then the second page to focus on Connor. The reader is left just staring at one of them, hearing the reactions of another character, but seeing the original character. And so we get this real tension. And if you don't know what I'm talking about here, I assure you, you have probably at some point been in a car or a room with a couple who are having an argument. And I'm not talking about would you like some hummus? I'm allergic to hummus, you know that. Oh, sorry, I forgot. It's okay, don't worry about it. We're not talking about one of those, okay? We're talking about one of those, oh my God, I need to find an excuse to get out of the room. That kind of tension. Because it happens. If you don't believe me that that happens, you have clearly never been in a relationship, and I feel sorry for you. Whatever the case, that tension is really captured here, and MacIsaac is really good at using dialogue within the panel structure to build that sort of tension. Now, again, there's just one or two more panels I really want to bring attention to really show you the skill of this book. In this passage, Connor's just been groped in a gay bar by a young twink, and if you note this bottom panel here, we observe Matt and Connor here, Matt and Connor here, and then Matt and Connor here. We don't have separate panels to show that time is occurring or that characters are moving through space. We have a solid fixed shot using other figures to demonstrate Matt and Connor moving through the bar. This isn't necessarily a new trick. There are plenty of cartoonists which have employed something like that in the past. But what's really unique about that passage is the way that MacIsaac employs it in the text. I'm trying to find... Yeah, okay. I got one last panel to show after this. But that transition is really important because sometimes I see this in comics where people will think, I've got to fill the page up with 30 different panels of one person moving from point A to point B. But don't forget, as Scott McCloud pointed out in Understanding Comics, you can demonstrate time in a whole variety of ways, and sometimes using just one panel and moving a figure across it can be another way to demonstrate time. That panel's interesting to me because it demonstrates that MacIsaac is willing to play with the visual. He's willing to play with the medium. Now again, as I noted in the summary, at one point Connor and Matt are finished having sex. Connor is looking down at Matt and he says, "I love you," and then freezes. What immediately follows is Connor ghosts Matt. Now, if you don't know what ghosting means, well, I have no idea what it means either because that's never happened to me. All right, fine. I've been ghosted, and it sucks, all right? It happens. That's just one of the side effects of modern dating. If you don't know what ghosting is, it's essentially where you've had some manner of contact with an individual, you've had regular conversations and or dates and or sex with somebody, and then out of the blue, they stop talking to you, and they won't respond to your texts or your emails or any other variety of messaging services that you use in today's beautiful digital day and age. Ghosting just means the person effectively is like a ghost. They just disappear out of your life. Connor effectively ghosts Matt. And so there's a beautiful series of pages in which we're able to observe Matt just messaging Connor over and over and over again that eventually begins with, "Hey, I'd love to talk to you if you get a chance. Hey, I miss you. Hey, hi, You okay? Did I do something or say something? Hey, we need to talk about this. I'm sorry if I did something stupid. And then finally the last one, he says, what is wrong with me? Again, having recently gone through a divorce, gotten back into the dating scene, I know the pain of getting ghosted, I know the pain of hard texts, and I know the pain of reaching out and not getting anything back. It sucks, because there's so much internalization that can take place in those moments. And MacIsaac demonstrates that so beautifully. One, by showing you the cell phone screen and making that a panel in and of itself, but then as well showing Matt going about his day-to-day life and sort of constantly checking in on his phone to see what happens. That's the last panel that I really wanted to show. I had this one pulled aside, but that's just because, rhetorically speaking, it's the moment where Matt begins to sort of really get up off the floor and find his life again and begin to make his life change. But really that last panel is enough because it demonstrates what's really interesting about Unpacking as a comic, in the fact that MacIsaac isn't just using the lives of a couple of gay men in order to tell a fun little story where some men occasionally have sex. He's really getting into the heart of what it's like to be single, what it's like to get out of a relationship, what it's like to put yourself out there again, and the real struggle with being vulnerable. It may seem kind of eye-opening to some heterosexual people as well, but queer people go through the same crap that the rest of us do, which is sometimes you put your heart out there, and somebody stomps on it. Or far worse, they don't respond back. And that sucks. And so eventually at the very end, when Matt meets a guy in a bar and he gets a response text, it's one of the moments where the reader's like, oh, he found love again. Maybe. We don't know. The book ends with Matt unpacking in his apartment. I get it. He did the thing, right? Where he says the title. Anyway, Unpacking is really interesting from a comics perspective for the way it uses the medium to sort of dig into the tiny little details of human interaction. And the pains, the lows, the highs, the joys, the suffering, the sensual, sexy bits, which, oh my, Mr. MacIsaac. And then just the risk that comes with taking a chance, unpacking your boxes, and living your life. Unpacking is gorgeous from beginning to end, and I cannot recommend it enough to you. And I think that's it. Well, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. As always, please like, share, and subscribe. All that jazz. It helps me. It helps you. It makes me do more videos, yada, yada, yada. Don't forget to check out your local comic book shop for a copy of Unpacking. I should forewarn you, Northwest Press is a very small press, and Steve MacIsaac, unfortunately, does not have a lot of attention that I feel he really deserves in terms of his craft, in terms of his aesthetic, just in terms of his career, period. The man is amazing. So if you can't find it at your local comic book shop, maybe check your local library. If they don't have it, check an interlibrary loan. But I'm also going to point you in the direct description section. I have a master's degree. Ugh. In the description section below, where I'm going to post a link to Steve MacIsaac's Etsy page where you can get a copy of Unpacking, as well as his t-shirts that he makes, a lot of his graphic design, several issues of Shirt Lifter, which again I would also recommend to you, and then definitely also check out his Goodreads page, because that will also provide you to links to some of his various books. And I would really encourage you to go to Etsy first before Amazon, because again, if you go to Etsy, Steve is guaranteed to get money for his book. If you go to Amazon, Steve Bezos is going to get money for his book, and Steve Bezos can suck it. Steve is awesome. I think that's everything. As always, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. Whoever you are, wherever you are, I am like so gay for you, and I think you're super cool. And yes, you can totally work that top, okay? Like, Justin's just being a bitch. Don't listen to him. I love you so much. Thank you for watching. Go read some comics. Thanks again, Steve.